Hello my friends, in this video we'll travel to the Maldives, which for many, is paradise on earth. Crystal clear waters, white sand beaches, and breathtaking landscapes. But there's a side that tour guides never show. A dark side, hidden among the vegetation and uninhabited islands. Stories of disappearances, of places that don't exist on maps. And reports of visitors who heard voices, saw shadows, and felt presences they could never explain. Today, we'll tell the story of a paradise that hides a forbidden secret. A place where the dream of a vacation can turn into a nightmare no one should experience. Get ready to discover the Maldives, the forbidden paradise. Story 1: The Blood Moon Ritual. The Maldives, for many, an untouched paradise. A place of crystal clear waters, white sand, and breathtaking sunsets. But there's a side to this beauty that never appears in travel guides, a dark history, whispered only among ancient fishermen, and forbidden to be spoken aloud. They speak of a ritual, known as the Blood Moon Ritual. A ceremony performed on islands that don't appear on maps. During a full moon, the sea recedes on its own, revealing symbols that seem to move across the sand, as if they were alive. There, sacrifices were offered to an ocean entity, a woman with blue skin, seaweed-like hair, and empty eyes, who rose from the waters to demand her due. The spilled blood stained the sea, and those who dared witness the ritual swore they heard voices, not just human, but something more ancient, whispering in a language impossible to understand. Today, we will reveal stories that should never be told. Tales of fishermen, of tourists, and of travelers who encountered this cursed island. Stories that end abruptly, leaving only the question: what if the next call is for you? For centuries, fishermen in the Maldives told stories that no one dared to record on paper. Stories of chants echoing in the middle of the ocean on full moon nights, male and female voices mingling, as if an invisible choir were calling out to someone. Some say they've seen lights dancing across the surface of the sea, like torches appearing out of nowhere. Others swear that, on these nights, the sea becomes heavy, and even rowing becomes impossible, as if something is pulling the boat under. Tourists have also disappeared. Records tell of divers exploring shallow, calm waters, but never returning to the surface. The next day, they found only their diving masks floating, as if they had been forcibly ripped off. One of the most disturbing accounts is that of a diary found inside a bottle. In it, a traveler described seeing strange symbols in the sand of a deserted island. He spoke of voices coming from the sea, of footsteps on the beach at night. And the last sentence written before the pages ended was, "They've arrived. They're not human." And it's at this point that the story ceases to be just a tale, and transforms into something even darker. Because there are those who say the ritual never ended. And that, from time to time, someone needs to be taken. In 1998, a group of 4 tourists decided to explore one of the uninhabited islands of the Maldives. A small place, off the tourist trail, known only to local fishermen as the Breathing Island. The name came from a curious detail: on certain nights, the sea would recede on its own, leaving the damp sand exposed, as if the island were sighing. They pitched their tents, laughing at the idea of spending the night there. But, as night fell, something caught the group's attention. On the beach, strange markings began to appear in the sand, circular symbols that didn't resemble footprints, or anything they had ever seen. It seemed as if someone had drawn everything underwater, and the tide, receding, had revealed the signs. One of the tourists, who was studying folklore, turned pale. She said those symbols appeared in ancient local legends, always linked to the blood moon ritual. The others laughed, but soon after, they began to hear voices. They didn't come from the beach, nor from the forest behind them. They were voices coming from the sea. They ran to the water's edge and saw lights floating on the horizon. Lights that moved slowly, as if boats were approaching. But there were no boats. There was nothing. When the full moon was directly above the island, the sea began to change color. First blue, then gray, and finally, red. The group panicked. It was then they saw it, hooded figures emerging from the waves, walking through the water as if it were dry land. The last recording made on one of the victims' cell phones shows just this. The sea completely red, the chants becoming deafening. And an enormous shadow, rising behind the hooded men, with seaweed-like hair and empty eyes glowing in the darkness. No one ever heard from those tourists again. Official searchers claim the island never existed. But the fishermen still say that on nights with a full moon, screams can be heard echoing from the middle of the sea. And they say the ritual never ended. On the next blood moon, someone will have to be chosen. And maybe that someone will be you. Story 2: Joanna's Nightmare in the Maldives. Joanna, 25 years old. A photojournalist, passionate about life, with a contagious energy. She trained every day, took care of her health, and still found time for her favorite hobby, capturing the world through the lens of her camera. She was dating Raphael, a psychologist, with whom she had shared 5 years of dreams, plans, and stories. Together, they decided it was finally time to fulfill Joanna's greatest wish, to visit the Maldives. They saved for months, adjusted their schedules, and embarked full of expectations for paradise. Crystal clear waters, overwater bungalows, white sand, it seemed perfect. But what Joanna didn't know is that behind that postcard landscape, something dark lurked. Something that should never be seen, and that would turn the dream into a true nightmare. And it was exactly there, where many seek rest, that Joanna and Raphael's lives would be transformed forever. Joanna and Raphael arrived on the island on July 22, 2020. She was bubbling with joy. She kissed and hugged her partner constantly, as if the world were theirs alone at that moment. She never stopped photographing every detail of the vegetation, the rays of sunlight piercing the leaves, the brightness of the exotic fruits and flowers, every gesture of Raphael's love. But, even in the island's exuberance, there are signs that only the most attentive perceive. As she walked among the trees, Joanna noticed something strange, a silhouette moving quickly amidst the dense vegetation. It wasn't a familiar animal, nor a bird. It disappeared before she could focus with the camera. She blinked, thinking it was her imagination, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. Raphael, busy adjusting his backpack and admiring the landscape, didn't notice anything. Joanna tried to ignore it, laughing to herself, but something inside her told her the island wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. And at that moment, she still didn't know that the island's true nature would only reveal itself when night fell over the dense, silent vegetation. What began as a dream was about to turn into a nightmare they would never forget. Joanna and Raphael walked toward the hotel, enchanted by every detail. They were greeted by wonderful staff, all smiling and helpful, making them feel immediately at home. But there was one lady who caught Joanna's attention. She looked at her strangely, as if she knew something, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Joanna blinked, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was just her imagination, she thought. Holding Raphael's hand tightly, she went up to her room, her heart pounding. As they walked down the hallway, Joanna couldn't help but smile. She was happy, radiant, full of energy, as if every cell in her body was celebrating that moment. Raphael was also excited, but it was she who showed true happiness, absorbing every moment of that dream come true. Little did they know that that feeling of security and joy would only be the beginning. And that something on the island, something no one could explain, was already beginning to watch their every step. After settling into her room, Joanna couldn't stop photographing every detail. The colors, the decor, the small, exotic objects, everything seemed perfect. But then, something caught her attention. Through the window, amidst the vegetation surrounding the hotel, she noticed a strange movement. It was quick, almost imperceptible. A shadow moving between the trees, creeping, as if observing the room. She blinked, trying to focus better, but the shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Joanna felt a shiver run down her spine. She tried to convince herself it was just a reflection, or maybe an animal, but something inside her told her it was nothing ordinary. Raphael, distracted by his suitcase, didn't notice anything. She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat, as if fear had weighed down her voice. And in that instant, Joanna noticed something even stranger. The room seemed cold, despite the island being warm and sunny. A faint scent of unfamiliar flowers drifted through the window, but there was something behind it, a metallic, iron-like smell, almost like blood. The joy that had accompanied her since boarding began to waver. And without knowing it, Joanna was already in danger. Something no one could explain was there, watching her every gesture, every smile. And the island, which had seemed like paradise, began to reveal its true face. Still dizzy from the shiver she'd felt, Joanna walked to the window, holding the camera as if to defend herself. She wanted to believe it was all imagination, but then, something caught her attention in a way that was impossible to ignore. Amidst the vegetation, a figure emerged. It wasn't human, but it seemed to walk upright. Its skin was too pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, there were no eyes, just dark hollows that seemed to suck in the light around it. Its hair seemed alive, moving like seaweed, and every movement made Joanna's heart race. She tried to scream, but her voice faltered. Raphael, still with his back to her, noticed nothing. The figure began to slowly approach the window, moving through the trees with silent steps, but the presence was so heavy, so dense, that it seemed to crush the air around it. Joanna felt an intense cold, a weight that prevented her from moving. The metallic scent grew stronger, closer. The figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at her. And, just as it seemed like it would all end there, it disappeared. But the fear, that one, remained. And something inside Joanna knew. That it hadn't been an accident. That the island wasn't finished with her yet. That the nightmare was only beginning. And in that moment, Joanna realized that the island wasn't just beautiful. It was alive. and it was watching. When night fell, it seemed as if the island had prepared a party just for visitors. The sand was lit by torches, and all the tourists were invited. There were tables laden with exotic fruits, colorful drinks, and soft music, mixing unfamiliar instruments with laughter and lively conversation. Joanna and Raphael felt welcomed. It was impossible to imagine that anything could be wrong. But, as everyone danced and chatted, Joanna noticed strange details. Some tourists stared fixedly at the vegetation, as if they were seeing something the others couldn't. Others laughed, but mechanically, as if guided by something invisible. And between the torches, shadows moved in ways that didn't correspond to any human body. The party continued to be joyful, but a shiver began to run down Joanna's spine. It was as if the island were alive, watching every gesture, every smile. And the more she tried to ignore it, the more she realized something was wrong. The metallic perfume returned, more intense, mixed with the sweet scent of the island's flowers, as if calling to her. Joanna looked at Raphael, and for the first time felt genuine fear. The joy around her seemed false. And something inside her knew, the island had prepared this party for everyone, but not to celebrate. And that night, something would happen that they would never forget. When night fell, it seemed as if the island had prepared a party just for visitors. The sand was lit by torches, and all the tourists were invited. There were tables laden with exotic fruits, colorful drinks, and soft music, mixing unfamiliar instruments with laughter and lively conversation. Joanna and Raphael felt welcomed. It was impossible to imagine anything could be wrong. But, while everyone danced and chatted, Joanna noticed something strange. Some of the tourists stared fixedly at the vegetation, as if seeing something the others couldn't. And it wasn't all of them, just the women. Face to face, eyes wide, as if hypnotized. Mechanical laughter and slow gestures, while the men around them continued to dance, oblivious to what was happening. The party continued to be joyful, but a shiver began to run down Joanna's spine. It was as if the island were alive, watching every gesture, every smile. And the more she tried to ignore it, the more she realized something was wrong. The metallic perfume returned, more intense, mixed with the sweet scent of the island's flowers, as if calling to her. Joanna looked at Raphael, and for the first time felt genuine fear. The joy around her seemed false. And something inside her knew, the island had prepared that party for everyone, but not to celebrate. And that night, something would happen that they, the women, would never forget. As the party continued, the men were invited to drink something that seemed harmless. And, without realizing it, they fell into a deep, heavy sleep, as if their entire bodies had been taken over by something invisible. The women, however, began to hear something. A strange, subtle call, coming from the nearby forest. And, unable to resist, they began walking toward the dense vegetation. Their steps were slow, almost hypnotic, as if guided by a force they didn't understand. Joanna, even in a trance-like state, didn't let go of her camera. It hung around her neck, turned on, as if wanting to record everything that was about to happen. Her eyes, fixed on the forest, followed every movement of the shadows that seemed to dance among the trees, shadows that only the women could see. And as they advanced, each step seemed to take them into another world, a place where the island revealed its true face. Joanna felt afraid, but she couldn't stop. The camera recorded every moment, every detail, as if it knew it shouldn't be seen, but needed to be remembered. And in that instant, the seemingly joyful party became the beginning of a ritual no one could explain. A ritual that was just beginning, and from which perhaps no one would ever return. As the women advanced through the dense vegetation, guided by the invisible call, Joanna began to notice something impossible. Between the trees, an old, isolated cabin loomed, and completely empty. But there was something strange. No one had ever seen that cabin before. Neither the other tourists nor the islanders. No one knew of its existence. Joanna's camera, still hanging around her neck, recorded every detail of the journey there. But something made the cabin itself seem alive, pulsing subtly, as if it breathed with the surrounding forest. She approached hesitantly. Each step seemed to take her into another world. The ground was covered in dry leaves, and the metallic smell, the same one she had smelled at the hotel, mingled with the scent of the island's flowers. But when she tried to show the cabin to the other women, she realized that no one else could see it, only her. And everything her camera recorded revealed details that didn't exist outside the lens. The cabin, lonely and impossible, seemed to be waiting for Joanna. As if it knew she had been chosen, that her curiosity would lead her exactly there. And in that instant, she understood, something supernatural, ancient, and invisible, was watching every move. And the island's true nightmare was just beginning. As Joanna approached the cabin, something impossible happened. At the door, the image of a shadowy woman appeared. It was the same lady from the hotel, but distorted, as if she'd been sucked into the island's darkness. Joanna shivered. And somehow, she lost her camera outside the cabin. It stayed there, hanging in the vegetation, but working, recording everything, even though no one knew what really happened inside. Inside the cabin, no one ever knew. The women disappeared without a trace. The local police hushed up the case, so as not to scare tourists. And we only know about this incident because, months later, a group of hikers found the cabin and took Joanna's camera with them. Dirty, covered in leaves and dirt, but working. Everything recorded showed details that seemed impossible. Details of a ritual that no one could ever understand. So, if you ever decide to travel to the Maldives, go. But remember, don't drink any drink offered. And, above all, never follow the call of the island. As Joanna approached the cabin, something impossible happened. At the door, the image of a shadowy woman appeared. It was the same lady from the hotel, but distorted, as if she'd been sucked into the island's darkness. Joanna shivered. And somehow, she lost her camera outside the cabin. It stayed there, hanging in the vegetation, but working, recording everything, even though no one knew what really happened inside. Inside the cabin, no one ever knew. The women disappeared without a trace. The local police hushed up the case, so as not to scare tourists. And we only know about this incident because, months later, a group of hikers found Joanna's camera. But the cabin itself never physically existed. It was as if it had been created just for them. Something supernatural that could not be seen by anyone else, something that fell apart when there were no witnesses. So, if you ever decide to travel to the Maldives, go. But remember, don't drink any drink offered. And, above all, never follow the call of the island. And that was the story of the forbidden paradise of the Maldives. A place that enchants and frightens, and that perhaps should never be visited. If you enjoyed this story, felt goosebumps, and want to continue exploring the world's darkest secrets, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and come with us to discover other mysteries that should never be told. But remember, some secrets should remain hidden. And you, perhaps you'll be the next to hear the call, **.